Okay then, let's have dinner. Sunlight shone through the windows as you sat in your living room, your home phone pressed to your ear. Cove was on the other end. Okay. It had been shaping up to be an ordinary day like any other until Cove had called unexpectedly. He sounded unusually nervous greeting you. You listened silently as he kept talking, his words stilted. Whoops. So, I was just wondering, do you want to come over to my house for dinner tonight? The question came out strangely, almost like he'd rehearsed it a few times beforehand. Your eyes widened a little. You hadn't expected this to be the reason behind the call. What do I say to that? We're social anxiety, nervous, and indifferent. I don't even know what to say to that. Cove continued. His next words sound rehearsed too, and tinged with nervousness. We're nervous and indifferent, and yet he has a crush on us. My mom and dad, they really want you to be there. If your parents don't have a problem with it, they asked me to ask you. You took a moment to think. Dinner at home would be quiet and uneventful today. If you really wanted to, you could go to Cove's instead. Can you come over, I mean? I feel like I'm going to go in other iterations, so... Why am I the only one invited, or did you mean the whole family there? That makes sense. The decision wouldn't be up to you if you wanted your entire family to attend. You'd have to ask your moms if they could make that time in that case. Mom and Dad only mentioned you. This whole dinner thing is their idea. You pursed your lips, contemplating your answer. I don't know. I'm feeling social anxiety. I can't, sir. Okay. Oh. I don't know if I should feel bad or not. But I haven't developed any real relationship with him yet, so I don't know. He ended the call after bidding you goodbye. As you set the phone down, you couldn't help feel disconcerted with the small event. Eventually, though, that feeling ebbed. Apart from that out-of-the-blue invite from Cove, the day was an average one. It ended on a peaceful note, and you went to sleep easily. And then nothing happened. And then nothing happened. Literally 2 minutes. 2 minutes, an invite, saying no, and nothing happened. Road trip. Even though you were awake, the sun had barely peeked its head above the horizon, and the sky above was still dark, though lightening by the minute. Usually you wouldn't be up so early, especially during summer vacation, but today was different. Today, instead of the lazy days you were used to, everything around you was a flurry of activity, as both your family and Cove's prepared for what lay ahead. Oh, double family vacation, eh? Because parked in the street just outside your house was a massive RV camper, so big you couldn't even see Cove's house behind it. His parents have rented the RV for a few days to take him on a short road trip to see the Redwood National Park. 7 people in an RV, though? Yikes. You glanced at Cove, who was standing nearby taking in the scene from in front of him. The prospect of the trip had to be a mixed bag for him, but it was only 3 days, so it seemed he was dealing with it as best he could. Your family joining them probably added to the muddled emotions. You weren't sure exactly how it happened. You knew your parents and Cove spoke to each other often, and somewhere along the way plans were made after Cliff offered to share the space. Your parents all thought it was a fantastic idea. You had already gotten a good look inside while helping to load everything in, and you had to admit that while it was a really big car, fitting that many people inside was going to be snug.
Let's go.
Move it or lose it, kiddo. Mom bustled past with a cooler in one hand and a large bottle of water under the other. She was upbeat for this early in the morning. Ma, however, seemed to be on the other side of the wavelength. She followed behind her wife, dragging her feet on every step. I'm gonna need a whole jug of coffee once we hit the road. Still in her robes. You could relate to Ma. It was way too early. Personally, you were as raring to go as your mom. You felt like you were a middle ground between the two. You just tried to keep up and took in some deep breaths. The air was still a little damp from dew, but you didn't mind it. And then at the end of the chain came your sister. She had a bone to pick before the trip officially started. Her rattling off critiques added some level of normalcy to everything new going on. I don't get why I can't sleep in the bed tonight. Risa is the youngest, and I'll never fall asleep in that loft. We're trying to make things fair on everyone. If you want to play the older card, you should be offering to take the loft both nights. It's important for big siblings to make sacrifices for their younger ones. Elizabeth huffed, not happy with that answer in the slightest, and folded her arms, leaning back against the side of the RV. The trip plans had been nailed down prior, the sleeping arrangements included. Elizabeth still held on to her objections with them. There was a main area of the RV with a couch, loft, and some floor space. At the end of the car was a room with a large bed. Your moms were sharing the bed, Kyra was on the couch, and father and son intended to sleep on the floor. The adults determined you and Elizabeth would switch between the small loft above the driver's seat and sharing the bed with moms. You were fine with the arrangements. You were excited to sleep in the loft. You felt sharing a bed with your parents was going to be awkward. You were looking forward to sleepover with your moms. You weren't too happy either, but didn't want to make a fuss. Thought it was unfair that Cove had to sleep on the floor. I mean... Owl nest. It would be a new experience for you and sounded kind of cool. Alright, you lot, does everyone have everything they need? We're heading out in 5 minutes. Now's the time to double check. You don't want to forget something important. At the word, Elizabeth yelped and dashed back into the house, her bedhead hair bouncing behind her as she went. Ma came over and gave you a smile, setting her hands on her hips. How about you, Risa? Do you have all your clothes packed? Toiletries, deodorant, floss, anything else you can think of? Confident you had it all. You weren't sure about that. Oh, you had to run back inside for something. You just gave her a flat look. Wanting to make sure everything was organized and ready to go, you had packed the night before and set your alarm too. Yep, I'm good. That's great. We'll have to wait for the ones who weren't as organized. But we'll be heading off shortly. With a few minutes left to spare before leaving, you mentally went over what you had packed for the trip. Clothes, a pillow and blanket, usual day-to-day gear for most people. You also had more personal things, such as a portable gaming console. Yes. The drive to Redwood National Park would take an entire day one way, so you wanted to make sure you had a way to entertain yourself while traveling there and back. Pencils and paper, a ball, camera. MP3 player with headphones. So much time going to be spent driving in a car, you wanted to make sure you'd be able to have some music to put on. Couple things to read. Packed one of your old favorites and a new one you'd never tried before. You knew you'd have plenty of time for them both on such a long drive. Camera. It was just a little pocket camera you had gotten from your mom's, but you couldn't miss the opportunity to take some new snaps. And that was it. Hey, let me take that for you, Risa. I'll stow it in the RV. There's a few spots left it'll fit. You let Kyra take your bag and give her a grateful smile. With nothing left to do, you watch the others getting ready for the trip. Kyra and Cliff seemed to have the most energy of anyone. They were finished packing the suitcases away, while your moms had gone to lock up the house. They high-fived whenever another one got crammed into the storage compartments of the vehicle. Even though your own parents were more low-key than Cove's, you could tell they were both excited for the trip. It had been a while since your family had been away anywhere together. Elizabeth skipped towards the RV, a bag slung over her shoulder, and you were surprised to see she seemed more optimistic about the whole ordeal now. Usually, she wasn't one to exit the confines of her room unless it was for TV or food or to leave her family behind to be with friends. You wouldn't have thought 3 whole days packed in an RV with 6 others would be too much for her. You would have thought. But it was a nice surprise. You supposed any vacation was better than no vacation in her mind. Cove had been pretty quiet so far, and more than anything, seemed to be overwhelmed by the situation. You were excited for the trip, too. You weren't very excited, either. You were eager to get to the destination. You were curious about the RV. You didn't feel much either way. It was your parents' idea to go on this trip, and the way you saw it, you didn't have a choice in the matter. Soon the miscellaneous remaining tasks had all been wrapped up. Everyone piled into the RV. It was officially time for the trip to start. Oof. I'm getting flashbacks to being in an RV. And it did. Cliff took the first shift driving. He cautiously navigated the massive guard of the narrow neighborhood streets. It was touch and go for the first part of the journey. Your moms and Kyra were all huddled at the front, trying to get a view of how much space they had on each side. There was a sense of relief when the first long leg of the trip was hit, and the RV would only need to go down one stretch of highway for miles. The mom group cleared out of the driver's area, leaving Cove's dad to it, taking more comfortable seats around the main cabin. You felt like you could finally relax now, too. Time slipped by as morning faded away. Before you realized it, the engine of the RV came to a stop, but only halted for a few moments as Cliff climbed out of the driver's seat and Mom took over. Ma was sitting shotgun and giving Mom a quick tutorial on the controls as it was her first time driving anything this large. Cliff groaned as he headed towards the rest of you, stretching his arms above his head and loosening up his muscles. We're making good progress. Yeah, maybe you should take a nap in the back for a while. That was a long haul you just did, and I know you're on less sleep than usual. Cliff waved a hand, that trademark grin of his slipping into place. I don't need sleep. I've still got a few miles in the old tank. He flexed an arm, showing off his muscles to drive the point about how resilient he was home, and Kyra rolled her eyes in amusement. Dad, everybody has to sleep. Cove shook his head at the tough guy act, though Cliff simply chuckled and ruffled his son's hair. So, are you going to be driving anytime soon, Mr. Holden? I want to know, so I can prepare. Did anyone pack some rope? I might need it. There's no seatbelts up here. Elizabeth called down from where she was lounging in the loft above the driving compartment. She was laying on her back, her hair falling over the side, and swinging around as the RV started up again, and took off down the road. A bag of potato chips was balanced on Elizabeth's stomach as she tossed a couple in her mouth right as Cliff held a hand to his chest, pretending to be offended by the remark. Kyra laughed lightheartedly. Lucky for all of us, we have enough adults to cover the shifts today. He won't be driving again until tomorrow. You stayed quiet. You shook your head at the ribbing. Phew, that's a relief. Just enough time to write up my last will and testament. Just enough time to write up my last will and testament. We shouldn't gang up on the poor guy. It's not his driving I'm worried about. You stayed quiet. I laughed at the joke that was going on inside your head. You didn't have anything to add to the conversation, but it was pretty funny all the same. Mom then shouted back in her seat to join in the conversation, a playful smile tilting her lips. What I'm worried about is this old monster getting us there and back again before falling apart. It looks as though it was built in the early 90s. It must be older than some of the occupants. That's just an aesthetic of the decor. It's not that old, I think. Did you ask what year the model was before you rented it? Kyra wrinkled her nose in thought. Yes, I did. I just can't remember what the answer was. Cliff chuckled at her while the rest of you let out a collective sigh. The RV lurched a little as it picked up speed, and you held on to the ladder to the loft to keep your balance. You felt something graze the top of your head before a weight settled on your red hair. When you lifted your chin up carefully to look, you heard the rustling of the bag of potato chips and realized Elizabeth had rested the end of it on your head. She gestured to the opening, silently offering to share her snack. You took a handful. Reaching up, you scooped up some chips. After that, the weight of the packet left your scalp. You happily munched away as the conversation continued on and you got closer and closer to your destination. The day flew by with the group of you chatting, playing games, and passing the time together before finally arriving at the park and setting up for the night. Mom was closing the windows while everyone got ready for bed, saying goodnight to the others as she made her way back to the back room. You had all had dinner together while still driving, and some hours after had arrived at your destination and found a spot to park in front of the rest of your stay. Giving a look across the front of the RV, you noticed almost everyone there was already dozing off where they were, with Cove having completely fallen asleep curled up in the passenger seat. He must have done so while Kyra was driving the last leg. They had decided not to disturb him. Kyra herself was the only one up there who was still awake, flipping through a magazine next to a portable light from her spot on the couch. It seemed Mr. Holden needed to sleep despite his claims. You followed your moms into the back room and closed the door behind you before crawling onto the bed between them. It was a queen-sized bed, so there was enough space for the three of you together without too much squishing. Get a good rest, Risa. We've got a big day ahead of us tomorrow.
That's fantastic.
I'm looking forward to the bushwalk in the morning. It's been a long time since I was out in nature like this. There'll be plenty for us to see. You stayed awake for a little while longer while your moms whispered about the park and the forest in general. With the sound of their voices in the background, eventually you nodded off to sleep. The next morning you were up bright and early, preparing for the day ahead. You had slept well. You had an okay sleep. There was nothing compared to your bed at home, but at least you didn't have to sleep on the floor, so you couldn't complain too much. Ma whined a bit about the firmness of the mattress, but Mom had only encouraged her to enjoy the trip while she could. While looking for a spot to get ready, you had some trouble finding a space of your own, as the others were doing the same thing. Cove was perched on top of the counter, brushing his hair and tucking up his legs every time someone wanted to move past. The parents were checking, double-checking, and triple-checking that you had everything, to the point where you had stopped listening to them altogether. You knew you wouldn't be returning to the RV at all that day, but by the look of the backpacks that were packed and ready to go, you doubted anything was missing from them. It didn't take much longer until you all exited the RV in a bustle and headed into the Redwood National Park. Ah, big trees. Wow. Cove had his head tilted up toward the canopy of trees, his eyes wide as he took in the massive trunks on either side of you. You knew that the redwood trees here were considered the tallest trees on Earth, but you weren't prepared for exactly how huge they would be in person.
Come on.
Smile, you two! You spun just in time for Kyra to snap a picture of you and Cove together, before she pointed her camera at Cliff, trying to get a shot despite his weak protests that she should just enjoy the moment. Your parents were walking behind the group a little, with Mom telling Ma some information she had read about the park in a brochure. Ma listened happily while looking around and taking in the sights, every now and then asking a question or making a joke about something Mom had said. You smiled at them, thinking your mom must have read a lot of pamphlets to know so much about the park. Maybe you should come and work here as a tour guide if you know so much about the place. Elizabeth teased, earning a squeeze on the nose from her mom. She seemed to be enjoying herself, but you thought that might just be because she was amused by everyone else's reactions. You were in awe of the redwood trees. You were fascinated by the sensations surrounding you. You were in a good mood. You weren't as impressed as the other. You were embarrassed that the adults were being so touristy. You were in a good mood. The air was fresh and clean, and it was nice to be outdoors with the people you loved most. You were certain that this was only the beginning of what would be a great day. The adults had decided on some casual nature walks rather than any serious hiking, and you strolled along at your own pace, taking in the scenery. Elizabeth sped up a little, smirking at Cove as she fell into place between the two of you, and immediately you could tell by her expression she was going to say something taunting. I can't believe our families are actually on vacation together. She threw her arms out, speaking with a genuine sense of bewilderment. I would have joked about something like this happening, but now I'm not sure I want to give them any more ideas. Cove spared her a look, but said nothing, and instead continued walking along. Just watch. Next year they'll be talking about their new amazing idea. She put on a fake voice deeper than her own. We should just sell both our houses and move in together. Think of how much we'd save on the mortgage. It was clear that Elizabeth was being sarcastic. Cove simply shook his head, not really bothered by her. You supposed he was used to it by this point. But seriously, they really do act like we're a single family just because we live across the street from one another. Elizabeth gave you and Cove a look, her eyes glinting with mischief as she leered at you.
Yeah.
Maybe one day we will be related, legally anyway.
What does that mean, Elizabeth?
She said it as though she was a gossipy old lady. I don't know why me and Risa always get paired up for those kinds of jokes. There's no law saying you have to marry someone your own age. Anybody could say me and you are the ones who'll get married one day.
In your dreams.
Me? In your dreams? You told her to cut it out, alright. Cove has a point. It wasn't a great comment. I'll marry... You ignored Elizabeth. You were embarrassed. You ignored Elizabeth. You said nothing, choosing to let your sister prattle on to her heart's content. You knew from years of experience that the best way to annoy Elizabeth was by not giving her any attention at all. Are you even listening? Huh? Did you say something? She huffed at you for that one. The day continued on with plenty to see and experience. You passed a few different activities that you would have liked to try out if you had the time, such as kayaking and rock climbing, but Ma said that would have to wait for another trip. There was a little stream during the walk that you sat beside and set out a picnic for lunch, nibbling on a selection of fruit sandwiches and chips. Various birds flew by overhead, and you made a game out of guessing the species that were hanging out in the trees nearby. You even managed to get a couple of them right, including the kingfisher that grabbed half of Cliff's sandwich. You were glad you got to do this in the end. You were disappointed to only have one day in the park. You thought the long trip wasn't worth only one day here. You had more fun hanging out in the RV. You hadn't had a good time with this trip. I'm gonna say this. What you saw today was only a fraction of what the park offered, and you wondered why Cove's parents hadn't planned a longer trip. You sighed quietly to yourself, wondering if you'd get the chance to come back. Your group made it back to camp just as the sun was setting in the sky, but the stars were appearing one by one. Everyone had enjoyed different parts of it most. You traded stories of what you thought while you were eating dinner. Then afterwards, you pitched in to help clean up. You, along with Elizabeth and Cove, got to head back to the RV early and spend some time together while the parents stayed outside longer. It was nice to have the space to yourselves after the cramped journey there. And while Elizabeth had locked herself in the back room with her headphones, you and Cove were left in the main lounge area. You headed up to the loft to relax on your own. It was your night to sleep there, so you might as well get used to it. You climbed the ladder and headed up to the loft, laying back and relaxing after the big day out. Cove stayed down below and spread it on the couch, doing much the same thing. Grabbing your backpack, you passed the time until the adults returned. You got a good few levels in on the game you were currently playing before getting stuck on a particularly difficult one. The parents all arrived soon after, each of them climbing into the RV and finding some place to sit down and rest their legs. Elizabeth, having heard all the commotion, came out from the room for the first time since arriving and joined you all. You spent the evening chatting and playing a few games, enjoying the last evening of the trip together. Bedtime arrived within the blink of an eye. As the group hunkered down for the night, your mom did a final round to be sure nothing had been left behind. She explained that Cliff was going to start driving early in the morning, like on the first day, but would be letting everyone else in the group sleep. There wouldn't be a need for all of them to get up. Now was the time to check you hadn't left anything outside. You, as well as everyone else, were confident you had it all packed up inside the RV, which meant it was time to get some rest before the journey home tomorrow. Your moms and Elizabeth said goodnight, heading to the back room while you climbed up to the loft. Cove and his family got situated below in the previously set arrangement. You tried to get comfortable as a million thoughts were running through your mind. It was hard to believe that the trip was practically over, and before you knew it, you'd be back in your own bed at home. You enjoyed this mini-adventure. You thought the trip had been okay. You felt the trip was a waste of time. You hadn't had a good time. You thought it was okay. You couldn't remember doing anything particularly exciting, but it was a nice change of pace from the ordinary. The minutes ticked by silently. It didn't take long for the soft snores of Cliff and Kyra to drift up to you. They were asleep now. You poked your head out from the loft and blinked through the dark. Cove's parents were indeed out. Cove looked to be staring at the ceiling. You slipped back into the loft fully before getting caught. You decided to have fun quietly. You went back to trying to sleep. You laid down, shuffling on your back, and looked up at the rivets set in the roof of the RV through the dark. At some point your eyes grew heavy and you gently drifted off into a deep sleep. When you woke up the next morning, it was to the rumble of the RV as it traveled the long journey home. Still blinking sleepily, you peeked over the edge of the loft to get a glimpse of what was happening. Cove was sitting with his mom on the couch, the two of them talking quietly. He must have noticed you moving around up there because Cove's ocean blue eyes snapped up to yours and he gave you a smile. Morning, Risa. Good morning, Cove. Soon your moms and Elizabeth emerged from their room dressed and ready for the day of travel. You spent most of the day hanging out together in the RV, savoring the last few hours of vacation. Kyra suggested a few different travel games she used to play with Cove when he was younger, and you all had a great time competing against each other. When the RV finally pulled into your street, it was well into the night, and you were looking forward to crawling into your own bed after the last few days away. Everyone else must have been feeling the same, because it was mutually agreed that unpacking and cleaning the RV could wait until morning. Once home again, you went straight up to your room and dropped onto your bed, shoes and all. You were happy to be in your own bed. It felt weird to be alone. It felt good to be alone. You wished you were still on the trip. It felt good to be alone. After 3 days squashed together in the RV like a can of sardines, having your own private space felt great. With those last few thoughts drifting through your mind, it wasn't long before you dozed off to sleep. Tomorrow, life would go on like normal.